Hey everyone, I'm Jake Levirne. I head up product here at DigitalOcean for developer experience. So all the parts of the product that developers touch, our API, our documentation command line, our control panel. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight was getting from MVP to MLP. But before we get to that, quick poll. I can't help it. I'm a product person. I need to do a quick poll. You can answer multiple times if you want to, but how many folks here would consider themselves a startup person? Startup people? Cool. How many people would consider themselves technologists? Great. About half or so. Product designers, product managers, great. Business folks, and again, you can raise for multiple. Great. Okay, so the feedback was sort of almost all startup folks, about a third to a half of each of the others. That's super helpful. And then we talk about Startup 101 from MVP to MLP. Shout it out. MVP means minimum viable product. MLP, guesses? Minimum lovable product. Yeah, that'll do it. So we're going to talk about minimum lovable product, which we always strive to build here at DO. But before we get there, every love story actually has despair at the start of it. So we're actually going to talk about how I learned to build minimum lovable products, which was by not building minimum lovable products. The way I did that was following this mantra: if you build it, they will come, which is absolutely untrue. And so I call this talk subtitle, actually, Field of Broken Dreams. It's a movie from way back when they thought, build that baseball field, players will come. They did there, they don't when it comes to building products. So a lot of what we're going to talk about are some personal examples from my journey in product. I've been doing product now for about 19 years. I've started a tiny company with my wife about 12 years ago. I've worked at IBM, 400,000 people. I've kind of seen a lot of different things. But at all of those places, thank you, that I've either built or worked at, it's always been tempting to fall into the trap of if you build it, they will come. And so we're going to talk a lot about how to avoid that trap and how to get out of that trap if you find yourself in it. But first, how do I know? What was my example? If we go way back to 2000, this is what a cell phone looked like in 2000. This was literally a sticker you could get on your laptop at Best Buy when you bought it. It said, warning, the millennium is about to come, everything might break. So it didn't, luckily, but and these did not exist at all. And this is important to my story because the magic in these devices, being able to understand natural language, was part of what I was doing at the second job I ever worked at. I got to meet up with a bunch of really smart researchers out of MIT who were focused on natural language processing. And we got together and built one of the coolest technologies I've ever worked on in my life, which was a search engine where you can type in a complete sentence or multiple sentences and it would bring back answers. So you'd ask it things like, this is an example on Yahoo Finance, which we were live on back in the day, show me all the companies with revenues over $30 billion. And it's like, here are all the companies with revenue over $30 billion. And I was like, wow, my mind is blown. This is amazing. And so that was, for me, the beginning of falling into this trap of if you build it, they will come. I ended up getting so excited about the technology itself that I missed quite a few important milestones along the way, which we're going to talk about. What we learned ultimately is that nobody wants to type full sentences. It would take another 15 years or so before there was voice recognition technology that was commercially viable and available. And then, yeah, it's great. Now I'll talk to a computer. But back then, typing out full sentences sucked. The way we learned that, the hard way we learned that was in 2000 when we started, 1.9 words. That was the average length of a query that users would type into our search. 4 years later, 2.1 words. So we missed a pretty key metric there. But what people really wanted, and again, this is 2020 hindsight, it's hard to see, but what people really wanted was a way to browse and navigate. They actually, the technology at the time that ended up winning in the space that we were in was a company called Endeca. It allowed you to, on a shopping site, for example, or when doing reporting analytics, you could actually drill through queries and build them one word at a time, which was much more attuned to the way that people were were looking for information back then. And so the end outcome for me personally, for the business I was working with, was that Endeca was acquired by Oracle for over $1 billion. And iPhrase, the company I was working at, was acquired by IBM for less than the VCs invested in it. So I share this painful experience because there are a lot of lessons learned for me, and those are the ones that I want to unpack for this. Okay, so why did we fall into the trap of building something that users didn't use? Like in hindsight, it's pretty obvious. You shouldn't build something that users don't use. Like we had this amazing natural language processing technology, but we weren't looking at the fact that people were typing in only 1 or 2 words. So how did we get there? So a couple of things that played out. VCs bought into the vision. We had some of the best venture capitalists investing in us. They told us how great this technology was. We were changing the world. We had those smart engineers that I was talking about out of MIT. We were heavily invested in our own solution already. You have to remember, this is back in the day when there was no cloud. And so we had our own data center stood up, not a whole data center, but racks within a data center. We had put a lot into the investment up to the point that, that we were at. And so that being heavily invested played out a bit. And customers were paying us. And so this one was kind of tricky. It's like, we're making money. We had $1 million contracts coming in from large companies for us to provide the search on their website. But all of this didn't quite work out. And the reason why, in hindsight, it's obvious. We didn't talk to users all the time. So this is maybe a very clear and distinct thing that we should be doing, but it's something that even professionally, after 19 years in product, I have to constantly remind myself to do, is to talk to users all the time. And some of the things that might trip us up is that there's a difference between users and customers, right? So getting at that first point, we had money coming in the door, and so it felt like, we must be doing something right here. But just because you have money coming in the door doesn't necessarily mean that you're building the right product. It just means that it's going to take you, in our case, 4 years to figure out that you're building the wrong product because you've got enough money to stay afloat and things are great. And it's not until there's this sort of realization that we're just not getting the usage that we want out of it that you're going to hit the problem. And so one of my big lessons from that time was that users and customers can be different. They might not be. Sometimes you happen to build a product that is used by the same person who pays for it, but your customer is the person who pays you, your user is the person who uses the product that you're building. If those two people are not the same, don't go to one to find out about the other, right? So in our case, we talked to customers all the time, and they told us how wonderful the technology was. And they were infatuated with their own website and their own product catalog. And they loved the fact that we could answer the types of questions that they could imagine themselves asking about their own products. But that was not a good proxy for the actual users who were typing searches into these search boxes. What was another lesson that I learned from that? Build just enough to learn something critical that you don't already know. So I talked a little bit about being so invested in this technology. And a lot of that was because we just hit the ground running. We were funded, we were building away. It was really cool tech, and those are not the right reasons to be building something. So one of the lessons that I've taken away is that really what you should be building is the smallest thing you could be building in order to learn the next thing you need to know. This might sound familiar or trite. It's sort of a mantra in lots of different ways. On one hand, move fast and break things. Maybe that's not quite the best way to do it. On the other hand, Reid Hoffman says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. So this is a great quote. I use this to remind myself all the time that I should not keep polishing. It's more important to get something out there and get feedback. Now, to be clear, Reid, who is the founder of LinkedIn, didn't say, if you're not indicted by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. He said, if you're not embarrassed, right? And so we kind of know what that means, right? We should get stuff out there, not when it's falling apart, not when it's going to break, harm, or hurt our customers anyway, but we should get it out there when we're not quite perfectly comfortable with it. And the reason why we want to do that is because we need to get feedback early on, right? Every day that we let go by where we're not learning something is the day that we're losing to our competitors or to another approach. And so to inspire this, just some examples of what like early first versions of services we all know and love looked like. Twitter, initial homepage, right? So we sometimes hold ourselves to the bar of the things that we aspire to be based on where they are today. We got to remember where they were back in the day. First version of Amazon, right? Amazon.com. Buy books. First version of LinkedIn, which is not that long ago. I know those first two examples are older, but LinkedIn is not as long ago, right? So we know that first versions and even second and third and fourth versions can be embarrassing and still be successful businesses. Okay, great. So I get it. I should listen to customers, or I should listen to users and customers, treat them separately. I understand that I should build the smallest thing that I can to learn. But what is that first thing that I should actually build? And my answer there, the way I think about this question is riskiest first, right? And I don't mean technologically riskiest first. I mean, what's the thing that keeps me up at night when I think about a product or a business that I'm working on? Like that thing is the riskiest thing, and that's what I need to find a way to de-risk as quickly as possible. And so there's a great model from IDEO about innovation and sort of evaluating and assessing innovation. And it just breaks it down pretty simply. Feasibility, desirability, viability. So you're just saying, feasibility, can I build it? Desirability, does anybody want it? And viability, can I make money off this, right? Otherwise, it's not a business. And so for those three things, if we look at those as the lenses of this product or business that I'm trying to innovate on, which of them, for me personally, is riskiest first? And especially for the technologists in the room, I'll just give a hint. It's probably not feasibility. As much as we want to figure out what's the most efficient way we can build something, what is the best language, framework, tool, cloud provider to use, like that's not the riskiest part usually, unless you're building rockets that need to take off and then land back on the exact same landing pad that they took off from. So given that, we need a way to sort of drill in to some of these other areas. And I know this is too small, but I'll just talk a little bit about it. I'm going to share all the links to all the materials, because as you can tell, I've just stolen all the good ideas from everywhere else, and I'm just spitting them back. But this one is called Lean Canvas. It's just an approach to creating a one-page business model for any new product, new business, new idea that you're going after. It's based on Lean Startups, a work by Eric Ries, further sort of refined by Ash Moria, who goes into sort of the tactics of a lean startup. But it's just great because it walks you through sort of this order of thinking through the major parts. And so I'll just get over here so I can kind of read through them, right? So problem, right? What problem am I trying to solve? Customer segment, who am I trying to solve that problem for? Unique value proposition, right? What am I doing that others aren't doing or that the current solution that they're using isn't providing? What is my solution, right? So important to note here that like that's way down the list, right? It's not the first thing. What's my unfair advantage, right? So how am I going to do it differently? How am I going to make money? What's my cost structure, right? So how am I going to make a profit? What are my key metrics? And then how am I going to go to market? What channels am I going to use? So again, tons of great material to read about this. I highly recommend Lean Startup. It's a good way to get familiar with this. This is just called the Lean Canvas. But it identifies specific areas that might be the riskiest for you at any given moment, right? So even once you've done this, you got to keep revisiting it because something new might be causing you to be up at night. And so I'll just run through some examples. Now I'm going to use DigitalOcean. I like to hope that I'm a little older and wiser. And so when we hit these types of challenges, we do things differently. And so I'm going to run through some examples that we hit here. So let's say I'm working on something and I know who I'm going after. I know my customer segment. I'm going after tech startups who are building the next great venture. And I know that I want to provide this solution of cloud services, but what I may not know is their problems. Like, what are their intimate challenges that keep them up at night? And so if I'm in this situation, how do I test this? And it's not just a question of how do I test this, what's the simplest, fastest way that I can test this, right? This is what we mean by minimum viable product is I'm not going to build out the complete solution. Instead, I'm going to figure out what's going to answer my question and let me sleep better at night in this particular area. And so at DigitalOcean, when we know who we want to go after, but we don't know what their pain points are, we talk to them, right? That's how we go for it, yeah.
Do we assume that you already did the research?
So this is the research. I mean, this is the, oh, you mean like market research?
Yeah, like identifying like the problem in the first place, you know, like all the research that you do before actually going to the customer.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the scenario. So in the scenario that we're in here now, right, our research has pointed to like the market we're going after. In this example, I've said, here's the customer segment that we're going after. Yeah, like on the flip, if you're at the very, very beginning, right, and you just know I want to start something, or I've got something that I think could solve some people's problems, yeah, you've got to do some combination of market research up front. You're going to be looking at quantitative data, which we're going to talk a little bit about. You're going to be looking at qualitative data like interviews. So you need to do it, yes, you need to do research. This is one specific type of research that I'm suggesting. I'm actually going to reference back to a talk that Colleen Diaz gave, which is if you know who you're trying to target, but you don't know what pain points or problems they have that might be a fit for you, you can go talk to users and you can do some very specific types of research to identify desired outcomes. So this is a research approach, lets you go out, go through a series of interviews first, using mostly open-ended questions, which we'll talk a little bit about, and then follow up with a survey, which will then let you analyze what things your customers or your potential customers or your potential users, because those are distinct segments often, are not able to achieve easily today, but that is very important to them. And so it's just a research approach that's going to let us figure out where our target customers are underserved. And just to give a flavor of the types of questions, I wish I had made these bigger, but a flavor of the types of questions that you would ask in the interview portion of this type of research is very open-ended. Tell me about a specific instance where you faced a particularly difficult situation with a tool or solution your team was using. What solution or tool and what was the story? Very open-ended, right? Gives your prospective customers or users a chance to talk about what matters to them as opposed to you narrowing them down into yes/no questions where you may be hearing what you want to hear but not necessarily getting at the root of their pains and problems. And then just another example, and we sort of had the pain point, but here, tell me about an instance where a tool or solution you or your team was using that worked particularly well, right? So give me the good story. You want to get people telling stories. That's a big part of this type of qualitative research. And so again, I'm going to reference folks to Colleen's talk. It's up on YouTube. Go into this more. It also has links to ways to conduct this and many other types of research that are appropriate for a given situation. Here at DigitalOcean, we did exactly this. We're working now on a product that is all about getting a web application built and launched more quickly. And so for that application, we know we want to target startups, application developers, UI engineers, even designers who might want to get something up and going. We go out and talk to those folks. So that was one sort of example of following through on riskiest first, right? It's not always that the next step I have to do is build something, physically build a product or build an app, right? In this case, the next step that I need to do in order to address the riskiest thing first is to go out and talk to users or talk to customers. Let's go to another example of what might be riskiest first in your particular case. I feel good about my unique value prop, but I'm not sure what channels are best for reaching my target customers, right? So here at DigitalOcean, for example, we've built the business on the back of content that we started with on day one, right? Way before I was here. folks were smart enough to say, we're going to write as many tutorials as we possibly can about using Linux, about using cloud, about using technology in order to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. Awesome. Now we found ourselves looking for other channels to go to market through, right? And so we experiment with paid advertising and others. I feel good about my unique value prop. I know that DigitalOcean is simple. I know we care about community. I know that we're open and we offer support that's unparalleled. I know what my unique value prop is that I'm bringing, but I don't know what channels are going to help me get that value prop out into the market. And so what's the simplest way to test this, right? What should I build in order to evaluate this? And here the answer is you got to test the channels, right? That's the fastest way to do it. A lot of people get hung up on not testing a channel until you have something to actually offer. I'm here to say, don't get hung up on that. It is perfectly fine to put something out into the world, test different channels, put it out on Google Ads, test Facebook, get a bunch of people to come visit you in a room so that you can talk about something really cool and see what the response is. And so like a little secret about this is that this session, and actually the 3-session series that we came up with here, is a result of trying to test out something that does not exist yet. We have a hypothesis actually that technologists are interested in material not just about technology and cloud and servers and different software stacks, but they're actually interested also in all the challenges around starting a business, like quantitative marketing and figuring out finance, making sure that your numbers work, right? And so we're testing that out. We put this out through the Hatch channel, which has been awesome. And we'll also record the video. We'll put it out on YouTube. So we've got our test going here to see what channels actually engage people with this content. And this is just an example of what it takes to do this. Again, I wish I'd made this bigger, but you got to compare channels. Like not only can you put it out there, but you've actually then got to gather the data that shows you which channels are working. And so this is actually real DigitalOcean data from across 3 different channels, search engine marketing, retargeting, and paid social. And we can see month by month how they're performing, both in terms of engaging users and also attracting users. So those should be flipped, but attracting users and engaging users. And so this leads to maybe some more interesting and in-depth questions about marketing. So first, I'm going to start by saying there are experts when it comes to search engine marketing, content marketing, and others. You should go out there and you should just read. There's a lot to be read. One of the challenges when you're learning about marketing, especially if you're not traditionally a marketer or coming from a business background, is like you go on and you type search engine marketing into Google and you're going to get a billion results of varying quality. I'm highlighting Moz and HubSpot not because we work or partner with them necessarily, just because they're 2 companies that produce great content that I've found valuable now and in the past. Moz, especially around SEO, SEM, and different types of marketing. HubSpot is the king of content marketing, and so I'd recommend taking a look there. One thing I will double click into and just drill down a little bit on is like here, minimum, like you've got to get some depth. A minimum viable product here in testing marketing channels is not just about putting a bunch of landing pages out there through different channels and then seeing where you get the most click-through, because that's not going to tell you the whole story. Here it's actually important to drill down and see which of those channels is delivering value. So you put out Google AdWords that drive 100,000 clicks. You've got to drill in and figure out what those clicks convert to in terms of the lifetime value of a customer. So this shorthand down here formula is just like the bare minimum, at least, that you need to be thinking about when you're doing testing of different channels. Lifetime value of the customer, right? So how much does this customer pay every time they come? How often and how long do they come, right? So for a subscription type business, they pay me $30 a month. Generally, a customer sticks around for 12 months, so $360 is the lifetime value of my typical customer. On the bottom of this equation, customer acquisition cost. How much did it cost me to get that one customer in the door? So here, what you're really doing is you're just looking at all the sales and marketing expenses that you have for a given time period, divided by the total number of visitors that you got in that time period, and that's going to give you your acquisition cost for a visitor, and then you got to figure out how many of them turned into customers. Point being, look at, for a customer, how much money they're going to give you over their lifetime, how much it cost to acquire them. Make sure that's way more than one. Otherwise, you're losing money with every customer. And then there are a couple of other rules of thumb, like whatever it costs to acquire a customer, you should get a payback on that in less than a year. You take all that, spin it out. If your LTV to CAC is greater than 5, you're probably not spending enough, like you're not trying enough channels. So there are rules of thumb. Again, I'll sort of point people, Moz, HubSpot, and lots of other content out there. But the point being, if this is the thing that's keeping you up at night, if you're like, you know what, I think I've got what's going to be the next hottest thing in the world, I just don't know how to get it to the people that are going to care about it, that's the thing you got to test. Like, test the channels even before you have the product. And there are plenty of great examples. Kickstarter is a perfect channel to test. In this way, people sell stuff before they've built it all the time on Kickstarter. So don't feel uncomfortable about doing it. Yeah.
Are you using any tools for all the analytics?
We do, yeah. We use Looker in-house. So the question was, do we use any tools for the analytics behind the scenes? We use Looker in-house. We use Google Analytics at various points in time. We've used Mixpanel. Throughout my career, I've used tools like Interana and Amplitude. There's a whole range of them. But for me, those actually are the big ones. Those are the ones I would look at. The nice thing about most of those tools is that they make the same types of bets we do, which is startups should be able to use tools for free or cheap when they get started, and then the ones that succeed, that's when they start collecting revenue. I think one more scenario, which is I know my customers, I know their problems, but I'm not sure that my unique value prop will actually result in revenue. So it's like, we're DigitalOcean, we want to go after startups. We especially want to focus on UI engineers or even designers who are doing UI engineering, right? Like, that's who we want to go after. And I've gone out and I've done the research with Colleen to talk to these folks, then do the survey, understand where they feel underserved. I know, for example, that getting started is actually a place where they're overserved. So there are plenty of places for somebody building a new web app to go and learn how to get started with Hello World. But they're underserved on things like figuring out how to better build their businesses, serve their customers, grow their teams, which again is the reason why we're here giving this series. But I know my customers, I know their problems. I'm not sure that my unique value prop will result in revenue. What's the simplest way to test this? One way, the way I tried back in the day, was build it out and then sell it. But as I was talking about, instead of building it out, sell it first. And again, Kickstarter is a great model for this. Like, think about it as, what can I sell to my customers today that I don't have, but that I'm thinking about building? And it can feel uncomfortable, but I can give a couple of examples. Last company I was at, a company called Yesware, we were building out tools for salespeople. We had a great tool for individual salespeople, helping them send emails, but we thought that maybe there is something we could be doing to help sales operations, sort of broader teams, be able to coordinate their selling, work together with Salesforce, make sure that all the information was flowing. We had this great idea. We whiteboarded it out. It's the type of thing that old Jake would have jumped in with 2 feet and built. Like, it was so clear on the whiteboard. Obviously, everybody was going to love it. And I was lucky enough to be working with a CEO at the time who subscribed to this model that we're talking about now, which is, no, we're going to go sell it first. Luckily, he was a sales guy, and so he never had the luxury of being able to build it first. I learned a ton from him, and we just went around to every unicorn that we could, because that's who we were focused on, right? We're like, every unicorn that we could, we're like, hey, we've got this cool tool for salespeople, and we think what you really need is a way to make sure all this data is flowing into Salesforce. Do you want to buy it? And we got 30 no's, and then we got 1 yes. And so that, yes, helped shape the product that we ended up building out, which was an enterprise version of the product that we already had. And that became our major revenue stream then for the next 3 years after that. So you can sell it before you've got it. That's my major point here. So where's an example at DigitalOcean where we do this? We just acquired a company a couple months ago called Nanobox. Really cool technology. Makes it very simple to deploy web apps to the cloud. But there are new things that we want to do with it. There's a whole new version that we're trying to build out. And so before we started writing a new line of code, the first thing we did was put up a landing page. We described the benefits that this new offering will include. And we do this all the time. This is just one example. Created the sign-up form, be the first to get it, get somebody to sign up, and make sure that we can actually gauge interest here. And then testing various versions of this landing page is our next step, because those bullets, the text, even the highlighted push code live in seconds, that's the value prop that we're testing out. Is it push code live in seconds, or is it deploy your web app simply with completely open technologies? Or is it scale, be ready to scale when you grow, right? We need to know what the value prop is that's going to generate the interest, engagement, and revenue. And so this gives us a way to test that before we build a ton of marketing materials, before we build the product focused on open versus focused on scaling, right? All this can be tested before we write code. But, and this is my caveat to that, yes, sometimes it is good to build something, right? It's not that you should never build first. It's not that you shouldn't put your ideas down on paper or even in code. It's just that if you're like me, your natural bias might be, I've got a great idea. I see it so clearly in my head. I just want to build it, and then I'm going to sell it. And I'm saying you should pause and maybe take a step back. But when you do decide to start building, there are lots of different versions of what it means to build something. You don't need to actually have a working app. You can learn a lot just from building paper prototypes or building wireframe flows that you walk people through, and you say, hey, if you were here using my application to do this and you clicked on this button, what would you expect to happen next? Right? You can test that way before you build something. And then you can build cool command line tools that make it super easy to deploy a web app in seconds. But that should definitely sort of come later. So great. I made it sound like we should be experimenting every way to Sunday. Here are the exceptions to the rules. There are a lot of exceptions to the rules, but here are two that I know of. Not everything's an experiment. We, even as late as 2004, were experimenting with, like, is it a shopping cart? Is it a shopping bag? Is there some other metaphor we should be? It's like, no. Look, that's settled. There are standards, either actual standards or de facto standards. Don't reinvent the shopping cart. There's no need to experiment there. There's no need to test. Just do what everybody else does in that type of example. The other reason not to experiment is, like, stuff is broken. My hair is on fire. My customers are, like, reporting this bug left and right. You don't need to experiment to know what the right thing to do is, right? When we encountered the vulnerabilities around processors, Spectre and Meltdown, it's not like we had to get together and A/B test whether we should fix the server. It's like, no, we'll patch the servers. We know that's the right thing for our customers, right? So for things like this, trust your intuition. Of course, you have to do right by your users and your customers. There's no need to experiment. Talk a little bit now about quantitative versus qualitative. So it's important to have both. It's important to, let me just make sure. Yeah, it's important to have both types of research. It's important to be understanding not just what the numbers say, but what your users and customers say. This is my shameless plug for Colleen's presentation, Pivot or Protest, how to position your idea with user research. She goes through lots of different methods of both qualitative and quantitative research, talks about the different reasons you might want to use one or the other. And just as a product person, I think what I'll say is it's easy to get sucked into one or the other or neither qualitative or quantitative research, and I would recommend a balance, right? So don't just look at reams of Google Analytics data and think that's going to tell you the pain points and problems and jobs to be done that your users actually have. And by the same token, don't interview 3 users. Hear something that sounds like, hey, that's the thing that everybody in the world needs. Like, you got to get both going on. And then the other piece that I'll talk about is data versus intuition, because this is something that I struggle with, but I think I have a stance on it now, which is data is absolutely critical, both qualitative and quantitative, but they won't tell you exactly what to build, right? Like, that's not the end of the story. Like, just having the data is not it. You have to then somehow synthesize that down into what you're actually going to do. And for me, the way I balance data intuition is I try to suck in as much data as I can. And then I think of my intuition as the way that I process all the data that I've taken in. And so if I've got an intuition and I haven't done the research, I don't trust it. If I've done the research and then I have an intuition, I go with the intuition. That's the way I process data. Your mileage may vary. There are lots of different personalities out there. Why should we not go on intuition alone, right? There are biases that we're trying to avoid, and these are what I've experienced personally. I happen to be more of a gut, like go by your gut, go by your intuition kind of person. And if you're that type of person, you might find yourself falling prey to some of these biases. These are well-known and well-researched biases. If you searched for these, you would find these and probably a dozen others that impact how we make decisions in business. Sunk cost fallacy, right? This is one that says, I've already put so much into this, like way back to my iPhrase days. We've built out the racks in the data center. We've got the MIT PhDs who have built out this cool tech. I've already poured so much into this, therefore it must be the right thing to keep doing. Like, that is one bias that you want to avoid, and that's something that this combination of qualitative and quantitative research, balancing out your intuition, can help deflect. Confirmation bias, I hear what I want to hear. This is simple. I get on a call, it starts from the questions I ask. Don't you think it would be great to have a cloud provider that makes it super simple for you to use their technology while still being able to scale up? It's like, yes, great, I heard what I wanted to hear in the question that I asked. And then even if I'm good enough to ask open-ended questions, just naturally as a human, I'm going to be attracted to the feedback that I get that resonates with the mental model I've already got in my head. And so this is another good reason for research and for qualitative and quantitative data. And then hindsight bias is like, yeah, I mean, it was clear, right? In hindsight, it was clear. And the problem is, in hindsight, it was clear. Therefore, this situation that I'm in that looks like that situation, the answer is obvious, right? So we want to avoid these biases. And the way that I, as a product person, have learned to help balance out intuition versus what could actually be biases is design thinking. I've linked back to that IDEO design thinking, which includes an entire design thinking PDF, which is an amazing read. But some of the nuggets or takeaways for me, design thinking, one of the things that it espouses or kind of forces me to do is rather than have like a solution or have a problem and then come up with a solution, is to allow for multiple solution possibilities. So to hold the problem, pain point, or question open for a while. And so what we're looking at here is like, you've got something, you've got this idea. Like either it's a problem you want to solve or some cool thing that you're building or you want to build. Before you dive in, hold on to it and then open up, right? So have some divergent thinking and create lots of different choices. And so this means that, one, you don't jump to the first thought that you have, and two, you've got multiple choices to pick between before you then come back with convergent thinking to make a choice. And so there are a lot of good design practices around this, but like even things like sketch sessions that allow an entire group of people to get involved and come up with a brainstorming of different ways that we can do things. Like there's so many different approaches to this. The point for me as a product person relative to this talk is holding a question open can help eliminate a lot of the biases that you normally encounter. And then there were a few more. So those first two, delay solutioning and explore multiple solutions, that's what we were just talking about around diverge before converging. Bias towards the user. This is the other one that's like is design thinking, and it's easy to lose sight of. But like when you find yourself struggling and questioning, like what should I be doing? Is this the right choice? Like who do we need to talk to? What's the next step? It's like bias towards the user. Even in a business setting where you've got customers that are paying you on behalf of users, I would say bias towards the user. It's so easy to naturally be drawn towards the dollars of a customer. It takes work and effort to bias towards the user. And so design thinking has helped me realize that and understand the full context and jobs to be done, right? I might think that I'm solving a problem like, where's Danny? Danny and I were talking, right? Solving a problem about helping parents be able to share materials with their children, right? Generation to generation, electronically. I think that's the problem I'm solving. But maybe the problem I'm solving is helping parents create meaning and a value system for their kids and in a society where there is less and less tie to traditional religions, right? Like you've got to talk to people to explore what their real challenges, full context are and the jobs that they're trying to accomplish. Jobs to be done is a keyword. Again, back to Colleen's talk or Googling it, it's just a design approach that lets you segment users not as personas or separate groups of users, but instead think about and classify your users based on the jobs to be done, what they're trying to accomplish. And we're sort of at just about at the wrap, but my most important tactic and something that I do very differently now than I did years ago was iterate. Lots of loops, lots of cycles. This graphic is taken from the GROWS method. Again, I'll share all the links. GROWS method is sort of Agile++. Agile software development has become a little bit cloudy in what it means. GROWS attempts to address that some, but the absolute important point is loops. Experiment, get feedback, small adjustments, and then identify the feedback, right? Like around and around. Loops, not lines. Organic, not robotic. Intentional, not accidental. Actuals, not proxies. So good reading here, but the most important point is iterate. And so major takeaways that I hope you come away from this talk with. Path of least resistance is what can lead us into the trap. We do the things that are comfortable to us. For a technologist, we focused a lot on the technology that we're building. For a marketer, we focus a lot on marketing that. Instead, we've got to do the things that make us uncomfortable. So actively de-risk the thing that makes you most uncomfortable. That's how you know where your focus should be. Find the simplest thing you can do in order to get comfortable. Like find the simplest way to de-risk, not the least embarrassing way to de-risk. And then move on to the next most uncomfortable thing. So again, like I said, I'll share out all the links. I'm happy to chat afterwards and I'll share contact information. But I'd love to know if there are any questions folks have before we wrap. Thanks. I appreciate you all coming out.